This is an ABC News special report. War with Iraq.
Good evening. This is Chris Wallace at ABC News headquarters in Washington. We are told that White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer is coming into the White House briefing room in a moment for an unspecified announcement. But of course, there is speculation that this involves the U.S. War with Iraq. The deadline that the president set for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq passed about an hour and 45 minutes ago. And there have been reports in recent minutes from Baghdad that there has been some anti-aircraft activity as well as sirens in the area around Baghdad. In fact, we have a Reuters report here that a handful of explosions rocked Baghdad at dawn on Thursday as jets roared overhead. Iraqi anti-aircraft batteries opened up and air raid sirens sounded. This is the report from Reuters out of Baghdad Thursday morning, Wednesday night here. The shot that you can see is of the press room in the White House. Photographers standing by waiting for Ari Fleischer to come out. We are told that the president left the Oval Office and went, well, here is the spokesman. No, I'm sorry. That the president left the Oval Office and went back to have dinner with Mrs. Bush in the White House residence. And there was some reason to believe that the attack by the United States might not take place tonight, especially as the evening went on and it got closer to dawn in Baghdad. And there is Ari Fleischer, the White House press secretary. Let's listen to what he has to say.
The opening stages of the disarmament of the Iraqi regime have begun. The president will address the nation at 10:15.
So there you hear it, White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer announcing that the effort by the United States to disarm the regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq has begun, if I look at my watch, about an hour and 45 minutes after that 48-hour deadline that the president gave to Saddam Hussein and to his two sons on Monday to leave Iraq. And as we say, just an hour and 45 minutes after those 48 hours had elapsed, the president made good on that promise and has apparently sent U.S. warplanes over Baghdad. As the very fragmentary reports at this point, but as we say, a handful of explosions have rocked Baghdad at dawn. On Thursday, as jets roared overhead, Iraqi aircraft batteries opened up and air raid sirens sounded. Reuters correspondent reporting from the city center said the blast appeared to come from the southern suburbs. He heard 2 or 3 explosions, followed by a similar number at about 5:30 a.m., an hour and a half after the U.S. deadline for war on Saddam Hussein had passed. As we say, as the evening has worn on in Baghdad, there was some feeling that there might not be activity today because of the fact that it is getting very close to dawn in Baghdad. And one of the big advantages that the U.S. has, of course, is its ability to fight at night, both from the air and on the ground, an ability that the Iraqis do not have. You can hear natural sound now from Baghdad. Those are the skies over Baghdad, and you can see that it is daylight there, or just before dawn. At this point, we can't see any aircraft fire over Baghdad or hear any of the explosions. Well, perhaps they're in the background. Ari Fleischer also announced that President Bush will be speaking to the nation at 10:15 Eastern Time. That's about 25 minutes from now. We believe the address will be from the Oval Office, and this will be to announce that, in fact, hostilities against Iraq have begun. The U.S. has been very open in its plans for several days now about how it plans to launch this attack. In fact, they have said that they are going to hit Iraq in the opening hours with 10 times the firepower that was used against Iraq in the opening days of the Gulf War back in 1991. 3,000 bombs and missiles, almost all of them so-called smart bombs, JDAMs, which are guided by satellites, and they believe will be far more accurate and far more devastating than anything that Saddam Hussein's regime saw back in 1991. One of our producers, Katie Texter, an off-air reporter for ABC News, is standing by in the briefing room at the White House. Katie, what can you tell us?
The president spent the day meeting with his military advisors. They came again this afternoon, left the Oval Office sometime this afternoon to have dinner with the First Lady. And originally, we really didn't think that anything would happen tonight. They really, just a lot of waiting around, wondering what was going to happen. And all of a sudden, all the aides, all the press hanging around tonight, just waiting to see what happened. We just had Ari Fleischer come out, tell us that, 10:15 we'll hear from the president, and we had always heard that the president would have the time, pick the time of his choosing, and that is exactly what he has done, taken a lot of people by surprise. And we should hear from him from the Oval Office that, the liberation of Iraq, as he puts it, will begin.
Katie, I understand that the president had some conversations with top administration officials in the last few hours. What can you tell us about that?
He has been on the phone, indeed. He was briefed by Andy Card at 7 p.m. tonight, who had talked to Tenet, who had told him that there was no indication that Saddam had taken this one last chance in his sons and had left it at that. Earlier today, he had met with Rumsfeld. He was here twice, and his war team twice today. So they had said all day today that they would be ready, and indeed they are.
Katie, as you say, and I think it is fair to report that we had gotten a number of signals from behind the scenes, certainly nothing definite. You wouldn't expect American officials or military officials to do so, but some signs that perhaps the military action would not begin tonight. Any thoughts at all? Do you think they simply were trying to give us some disinformation in hopes that we would pass that sense that tonight was not the night on to the world, or do we think something changed?
We had heard that from several people that, not to expect it tonight. It would be later, that things weren't quite in place, that it would be one last night, keeping the Iraqis on their toes, waiting for those bombs to fall. And, here it is, a White House that goes to bed early, and people are here at all hours tonight. And now we know why. They took a lot of people by surprise, which is what they had said all along that they had intended.
Let me ask you about one other thing. I think one of the other sort of conventional wisdom ideas that we all had was that that when the U.S. did finally strike, they would strike in the middle of the night because of the tremendous technological advantage that the U.S. has in night fighting over the Iraqis. Any thoughts at all as to why the U.S., as we can see, has launched this attack with daylight dawning in Iraq and, as we can see, over the capital of Baghdad?
I think it's just the element of surprise, and they had always said we're going to hit them from all sides and no one's going to know when it was coming. And this was the best way, I guess, that they felt that they could do that. And, but the president has been receiving just regular briefings from his advisors, from the NSC. And, they said that the plan is in place. They've been saying that for some time. And today the word from the White House was that they were just going to wait until the military leaders said it was time. And apparently sometime this afternoon, they told them that it was time to go.
Katie, it is somewhat reminiscent of what went on back in 1991 when this President Bush's father, George Herbert Walker Bush, set a deadline in mid-January for Saddam Hussein to get out of Kuwait. And when he failed to do so, that very first night he struck. ABC correspondent Chris Bury is with the Central Command in Doha, Qatar. Chris, what can you tell us from there? Chris Bury, you're on the air.
New York.
Chris Bury?
Yes.
Apparently, we're having a technological problem getting Chris Bury up, so we'll wait a couple of moments. Katie, let's go back to that issue, and we probably should reset for people who may have just joined us. Ari Fleischer, the presidential spokesman, came into the briefing room at about 9:45 Eastern Time, about 10 minutes ago, to announce, quote, the opening stages of the disarmament of the Iraqi regime have begun, as well as to announce that President Bush will address the nation from the Oval Office at 10:15. That's about 20 minutes from now. I wonder, Katie, any thoughts about that? That when this president set this deadline of 48 hours, there's been some talk, I know, over the weekend. Vice President Cheney said some people call this fella a Westerner, a cowboy, and maybe that's not all bad, that when he says something, he means it. Any thought that maybe there was some psychological effect to setting a deadline and then enforcing it?
Well, a lot of aides have said that the president is much more at ease ever since he made the address to the nation on Monday, that he has been ready to go. He is at ease with his decision, and that, that once he addressed the nation and it was time, and no matter what, whether Saddam Hussein had left or not, that the military was going to go into Iraq. And he has been at ease with that, everyone has said, and he has been ready to go. And I think that, for him, sooner rather than later, why wait? They've been waiting 12 years to get this done, and they're ready to go.
Again, there you can see pictures of the sky over Baghdad as it is getting lighter and lighter there. And let me repeat, the one report we have is from Reuters News Service. A handful of explosions rocked Baghdad at dawn on Thursday as jets roared overhead. Iraqi anti-aircraft batteries opened up and air raid sirens sounded. A Reuters correspondent reporting from the city center said that blasts appeared to come from the southern suburbs. He heard 2 or 3 explosions, followed by a similar number at about 5:30 a.m. That would be about 25 minutes ago. So this all has taken place in the last half hour or so. And although it does look like a very clear and very peaceful day there in Baghdad, at least the vantage point from our camera, apparently the attack that the U.S. has been promising now for some period of time, and specifically after the president's deadline on Monday, one that they have described as bringing shock and awe on the regime of Saddam Hussein, has begun. They have talked about an enormous number of cruise missiles, smart bombs being launched against targets all across Iraq, not just on Baghdad, but against strategic assets that Saddam Hussein has in the north to try to protect the Kurds in the north, the oil fields up there, in the Shiite area in the south around Basra, and also especially out in the western desert near the Jordanian border. Those are especially important because if Saddam Hussein has any Scud missiles, they might well be in the western desert and able to hit Israel from that vantage point. And of course, one of the great fears in this war is that with the United States having promised regime change, the ouster of Saddam Hussein, that he may feel he has nothing to lose and may use, if he has them, weapons of mass destruction against Israel, against U.S. forces in the area, and against any allies of the United States in the Middle East. So it is fair to say that although the picture that you're seeing on your screen looks deceptively peaceful right now, that as the Pentagon has described it in a somewhat poetic turn of phrase, shock and awe is being delivered on the Iraqi regime all over the country. As you can see, we're coming up on almost 6 a.m. in Baghdad, 10 p.m. here on the East Coast. And again, for those of you who may be joining us, and we assume people are tuning in, as word spreads that the long-awaited war against Iraq has begun, Ari Fleischer came into the White House briefing room at about 9:45, about 12 minutes ago, to announce that the opening stages of the disarmament of the Iraqi regime have begun, and that the president would address the nation at the Oval Office, from the Oval Office, at 10:15. ABC's military consultant Tony Cordesman is with us now. And Tony, first of all, do you know anything about what's going on right now?
We really don't, Chris. We were certainly under the impression that this might not begin till Friday, but there are some good reasons to try to make these strikes a bit earlier than we expected.
Well, why don't we go through those?
Well, one of the key ones is the possibility that Saddam's missile forces, the forces that might have chemical weapons, have been positioned or moved. Another is that he's dispersing key forces, things like the Special Republican Guards, the various security forces that he depends on. They're moving out of the target areas we've identified. He could be moving weapons of mass destruction deep inside the country. This idea that we preempt his ability to carry out a surprise attack to us is a possibility that many people in the Pentagon have raised.
Let me ask you, though, about, I think, one of the things that surprised us, and you and I were talking about this, in fact, in the hallways here at ABC earlier today, and that was the unlikelihood that the U.S. forces would strike so close to dawn when they would lose their advantage of being able to have so much technological superiority over the Iraqi forces during nighttime. Any thoughts as to why that wasn't an overriding consideration?
Well, I think there are several reasons. The main risk that you have in attacking in the light is that you would give up the secrecy you have in moving aircraft. The Iraqis have some air defenses that have optical systems, not just radars. But most of those systems have a fairly short ability in terms of altitude to hit our aircraft. And if we have any time urgent targets, then if we hit at this point in the day, just as dawn is breaking or while it is still dark, we have a long time window in which we can attack, and we do achieve some element of surprise. It's probable that the Iraqis expected us to attack late in the evening, not now.
We should, incidentally, there is one other interesting piece of news, and Tony, stay with us here. According to Reuters, a bulletin out of Baghdad, that the U.S. military is now broadcasting in Arabic on the Iraqi state radio frequency. One of the key elements in this war, the Pentagon has been very clear about, is psychological operations, that it's not just simply a military drive to destroy the regime of Saddam Hussein, but also a psychological operation to, in effect, give the Iraqis from Saddam Hussein on down the sense that the U.S. is going to take over the country. And obviously, if the U.S. military has now taken over Iraqi state radio, that has got to have some psychological effect. As we say, Tony, there obviously is a deceptively calm sky, what we're able to see over Baghdad, but you've been fully briefed. Give us a sense of what you believe the U.S. is doing in these opening minutes of the air war against Saddam Hussein.
Well, Chris, one thing we need to be very careful about is that at least in the past, there have been times when Baghdad has sort of lit up the horizon with anti-aircraft fire, and there have been only a few or no aircraft in the area. Now, we could be carrying out selective strikes for some very specific purpose, rather than launching an entire air war. Or we could be in a situation where the Iraqis were reacting to a false alarm in the radar. So what we do see, what we're likely to see, however, from the start of this, is our special forces, which have aircraft that can take over their radio and TV stations with a very intensive propaganda and psychological campaign, and either the jamming of the Iraqi broadcasts or indeed the destruction of them from the air.
Tony, though, clearly this is not some false alarm or some overactive anti-aircraft gunner from the Iraqi side, since we know that the president is going to address the nation. I'm curious, why aren't we seeing, at least from the vantage point of this one camera, why do you think we're not seeing more of an attack on Baghdad in this early stage?
We have said that we're going deeply into effects-based bombing. We know that some of the things we need to strike at first are their air defense command centers. Most of those are far outside Baghdad. It's very likely that most of their weapons of mass destruction are dispersed outside the city in areas where we can't see them. The Republican Guards units, one of the key target areas, again, outside the perimeter of Baghdad. Even most of the large surface-to-air missile systems that are deployed around Baghdad are far enough away so we might not see the strikes.
Let me ask you, do you believe, Tony, that in fact the ground troops that the U.S. has massed right on the border, right in the demilitarized zone between Kuwait and Iraq, do we believe that those forces now have crossed the line? You know, there's been a lot of talk about simultaneity, that this is not going to be an air war followed sometime later by a ground attack, but in fact that the U.S. would be hitting Saddam Hussein's forces from all sides at the same time.
Well, Chris, you raise a very good point, because we got the impression earlier today that those units weren't fully ready to launch the attack, and we were told, at least at one point in the Pentagon, that there might be 3 days of air campaign before the major ground force attacks began. We have also been told exactly what you said, and that we'd get a lot of surprises. And there are some units, like the air mobile units, the 101st Airborne Division, the brigade from the 82nd. These could be moving. We wouldn't really know about it. A lot of those movements could go deep into Iraq. They could be inserting special forces. Our allies, the Australians, have special forces in the area. The British have their SAS and also the 3rd Commando. So a lot could be happening on the ground, even if our major armored units aren't moving.
You know, Tony, and we rely on you for your expertise, and you may be right on in our trying to understand why this attack has begun now. I have just been given some wire copy. This is Associated Press out of Washington, saying that U.S. forces launched a surgical military strike against a, quote, target of opportunity near Baghdad after U.S. intelligence detected the possibility Iraqi leaders were in the area. So there is some indication there that perhaps they saw their opportunity and they took it. Tony, at this point, Peter Jennings has arrived at ABC News headquarters in New York, and we turn over our coverage to him right now. Peter?
Thanks very much, Chris. Actually, we've been here for some time listening to you, trying to figure out exactly what's happening, whether or not this is the opening attack of this war or whether, as you've already pointed out, we have a target of opportunity, and they saw some of the Iraqi Ba'ath leadership wandering around in the southern parts of the city, moving somewhere or another. But at the moment, after this period of calm that you have been talking about, we've managed to get Richard Engel for ABC News up on the telephone line. Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And I gather you may be hearing other explosions at the moment. Am I correct?
They've been quite sporadic for about the past half hour or so. It started, well, a little bit more than half an hour. It started right before sunrise, and first the air raid sirens started howling. Everyone, I jumped out. I'm standing on the balcony overlooking Baghdad. I have a very clear view from the 14th floor. Then there was about a 10-minute burst of anti-aircraft fire. You could see the actual tracers going up through the sky. I couldn't hear any jets or any planes, so I had no idea what they were firing at. Then at a later stage, I did hear a jet pass over. Then it went calm. And then in the last few minutes, a little bit outside of the city, I heard another series of explosions. What exactly they were firing at, it's not sure. But again, the second time I did hear a plane flying overhead.
This is, of course, very different than the opening of the last war, which in itself was something somewhat misleading, because the anti-aircraft fire that the Iraqis loose off, trying to put up this curtain of lead from against whatever is incoming, has not been evident this time. So you haven't seen a whole lot of anti-aircraft going off, am I right?
No, this was not the massive anti-aircraft display. It seems like, and I don't know, I just can tell you and only speculate based on what I saw, that this was some sort of test, or that, one aircraft was sent in to see what kind of thing they've got. There was not a massive uploading of anti-aircraft, nor did I hear any major explosions of any firing, or I couldn't see anything go up in flames. There's no plumes of smoke around. So it's hard to know exactly what had happened, but something certainly did and is continuing to, seems to be continuing. I think I'm hearing explosions again.
Okay, Richard, you listen for a second.
Yes, I am in the south.
Richard, you listen for a second and we'll come right back to you, but I want to go to John McWethy at the Pentagon, because we've all been trying to sort out basically what Mr. Fleischer said, the president's spokesman, when he said, John, that the opening stages of the disarmament of the Iraqi regime have begun. This does not, I don't think, necessarily means that an overall attack has begun, right?
No, it does not. What it does represent, Peter, is the kind of flexible approach to this situation that the administration said they were going to take in the first place. This is a barrage of cruise missiles. There was a meeting at the White House this afternoon, and although the plan called for the opening major air offensive to begin in several days, they discovered or believed that they had a target of opportunity to get some of the leadership either through, well, various kinds of intelligence that they had been gathering. They determined that they were in a particular location, and they went after it with a barrage of cruise missiles. They turned this around in a big hurry, and they have begun this campaign way ahead of where they were planning to. I think it's open to question whether or not they are now going to kick off some other aspects, or if they are going to slip back into the major plan that they had laid down previously.
Well, it's a tremendously interesting question because everything was so key. There was such a plan. The ground units began to move towards the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border this evening, all very timed, very carefully to move on the southern city of Basra immediately. John, if they decide, not that the element of surprise is a huge component here because the Iraqis knew the United States was coming. If they decide to play it by ear now, how much of a spanner, how much of a monkey wrench does that throw into the overall planning?
Oh, I think it would complicate quite a few things, Peter, to deal with the kind of orchestration that is required with so many troops coming from so many different directions. I think it will be extremely difficult for them to execute the entire plan just at the drop of a hat. So I think they're going to probably continue to look for moments of opportunity when they feel they can strike at the leadership and go after that. This is also another way of forcing the Iraqis to light up their air defense system, gives the U.S. a very, very good look at the different air defense frequencies. This is something the U.S. was probably going to do anyway, to do a feint, to run aircraft right up to Baghdad and turn around and go away.
John, it may be. I just want to offer up an instruction to Richard Engel, if you would mind. Richard Engel, I know you can hear me in Baghdad. If you wouldn't mind turning on, if you haven't already, Iraqi State Radio. Have you turned it on already?
Okay. I have. I wasn't trying to. Why don't you continue your conversation? I'll try and find this radio. You're trying to find the reports that the American military is broadcasting on the radio?
Exactly. So if you'll listen for a second and see what the tone of the broadcasting is on Iraqi State Radio, we'll go on and come back to you in just a second. John McWethy, again...
Okay, I'm going to put down the phone.
Okay. John McWethy, it may be that the huge flurry of activity is really just us to some extent here, and that all of our attention gives the impression that an attack has begun, when in fact this may have been an isolated target of opportunity attack and may go back to Plan A originally.
That may be what happens, Peter. I think it'll be interesting to hear what the president has to say in a few minutes when he addresses the nation. I think what he's signaling is the U.S. will go after Saddam Hussein and his leadership anytime, any place, regardless of any predisposed plans that the military had laid down.
Okay, I should tell people the president will address the nation in about 4 minutes, but this is a very interesting report from Baghdad, which we're checking at the moment, which was first carried on the Reuters news agencies, which said the main frequency of the Iraqi State Radio, which of course is the mouthpiece for Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath regime, suddenly came on this evening and appeared to have been taken over by the U.S. military. Do I hear it in my ear? I'm not quite sure. And the announcer said in Arabic shortly after the normal Iraqi broadcast went off the air, "This is the day we have been waiting for." Back to John McWethy again, because John, one of the many, many components of the new technological approach to warfare is the ability to do this, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of deception, number one, and the ability to communicate directly to the Iraqi people. These are all part of the way the administration has designed this war, both prior to the actual first acts of violence, the first bombing. For weeks and weeks, they have been trying to communicate with the Iraqi people.
Okay, John, thanks so much. Just hang on for a second to go to the White House. Now, Terry Moran, who's our White House correspondent there, waiting for the president to come out. Terry, the overall concept of this has been, at least in the public conversation of it for months and months and months, has been shock and awe, which is this huge shock to the Iraqi system. And this awe as a result. This is not the huge, noisy, everywhere assault shock that we'd anticipated.
Unless you're a member of the Iraqi leadership, Peter. I think always that shock and awe was designed to shock and awe some specific people. This White House, this president, this administration have been very conscious of the potential pitfalls of large civilian casualties and a bloody war in Iraq. A quick strike aimed at decapitating some of the Iraqi leadership and sending a very strong message to anyone else in that leadership might advance their goals without a lot of bloodshed. That shock and awe is designed to shock and awe some very specific people and kill some of them, too.
Very interesting, too, because the first bombers, by the way, used in the 91 war were the B-17s, and they went in today. So the first bombers in tonight apparently using the F-117s, apparently using some cruise missiles and some bombing today. And according at least to the Associated Press reporting out of Washington, this initial plan to go after the Iraqi leadership as a target of opportunity involved a handful of cruise missiles as well. And that may well be, we shall learn from the president perhaps in just a couple of minutes, why Baghdad overall, the city of a little more than 4 million people, is quiet and seemingly calm in many respects as you look at the rising sun at about 6:15. Let's go back to Richard Engel. Richard, have you managed to pick up the radio? Okay, we've lost him, which is no surprise. It's almost a surprise to have him under circumstances like this. But Tony Cordesman, our principal military analyst, is with us. Tony, we've got just about a minute before the president comes along. Are you surprised at this?
Yes, I am, Peter, but I guess it's a tribute to the quality of our intelligence, the fact we can react so quickly and improvise a plan with so little warning.
Okay, thanks, Tony. The president coming along in about 25 seconds from now. Mr. Bush, as you know, had a fairly quiet day. It was described as something of an eerie day at the White House. Everybody was quiet and somber today. There was no particular business. The president got his usual briefings from the intelligence staff, and the military staff didn't go anywhere, didn't talk to anybody of huge significance, went for a walk with the dog, and is now back to talk to the nation.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign. More than 35 countries are giving crucial support, from the use of naval and air bases, to help with intelligence and logistics, to the deployment of combat units. Every nation in this coalition has chosen to bear the duty and share the honor of serving in our common defense. To all the men and women of the United States Armed Forces now in the Middle East, the peace of a troubled world and the hopes of an oppressed people now depend on you. That trust is well placed. The enemies you confront will come to know your skill and bravery. The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military. In this conflict, America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war or rules of morality. Saddam Hussein has placed Iraqi troops and equipment in civilian areas, attempting to use innocent men, women, and children as shields for his own military. A final atrocity against his people. I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. A campaign on the harsh terrain of a nation as large as California could be longer and more difficult than some predict. And helping Iraqis achieve a united, stable, and free country will require our sustained commitment. We come to Iraq with respect for its citizens, for their great civilization, and for the religious faiths they practice. We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people. I know that the families of our military are praying that all those who serve will return safely and soon. Millions of Americans are praying with you for the safety of your loved ones and for the protection of the innocent. For your sacrifice, you have the gratitude and respect of the American people. And you can know that our forces will be coming home as soon as their work is done. Our nation enters this conflict reluctantly, yet our purpose is sure. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. We will meet that threat now with our Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines, so that we do not have to meet it later with armies of firefighters and police and doctors on the streets of our cities. Now that conflict has come, the only way to limit its duration is to apply decisive force. And I assure you, this will not be a campaign of half measures, and we will accept no outcome but victory. My fellow citizens, the dangers to our country and the world will be overcome. We will pass through this time of peril and carry on the work of peace. We will defend our freedom. We will bring freedom to others, and we will prevail. May God bless our country and all who defend her.
President of the United States showing up to everybody's surprise, I think, which may well have been the intention. And when the White House left this evening, the President took the dogs for a walk, went up to the private quarters. Virtually all the news agencies in town were told in one way, shape, or form that this was not the night, and it may well indeed not be the night for the huge operation that the U.S. has planned against the Iraqis. And we can get some sense of that because ABC's Ted Koppel, who is with the 3rd Infantry Division, has had a sense from his commanders that this was about to happen, and I think is up on the line at the moment. Ted, are you there?
I'm here, Peter, and I can't tell you that I got this information from the commanders. Indeed, I did not. But there is a sense here that what has happened was, in fact, something of a surprise. They didn't know about it until about 2 hours ago when they were warned to clear the airspace around here. That's the command that came through. And the apparent indication is that there was a target of opportunity in Baghdad. Now, that could be any number of things. It could have been that Saddam himself was seen moving around. That would, of course, be the biggest target of opportunity of all. It could have been that some of the Republican Guard divisions, which have been hunkering down in a defensive position, that one of them may have been moving and provided a ripe target. But I think you were quite right in what you said a moment ago, and that is this did come as a surprise. It even came as a surprise to the men of the 3rd Infantry Division, most of whom have now deployed to preordained positions up just short of the Iraqi border. That's where they were supposed to be. They're still there. Nothing has changed in their mission for the moment.
Okay, well, then you've answered the obvious question, or you've confirmed the question, which was target of opportunity, as in fact has been coming out of Washington this evening, because you guys are on something of a plan, have been for some days, and that, as far as you know, in the last 25 minutes hasn't changed.
No, that plan has not changed, and nothing has changed as far as the 3rd Infantry Division is concerned. And I think you can obviously expect far more and far more intense air attacks and cruise missile attacks. What happened just a couple of hours ago, as I say, came as a surprise not only to you back in Washington, but to the men of the 3rd Infantry Division out here, too.
What was the reaction in the division when it was happening?
Well, quite frankly, Peter, there's not much of the division left where I am. We have stayed. What you see back there, along with those little fires, which are just disposal of waste, what you see back there is the command headquarters that is quite literally coming down. They're pulling down, and it's a fascinating complex of tents, which will be set up again just a few miles south of the Iraqi border, so that the commanding generals have a place to which they can return until the ground attack begins. But very few members of the 3rd Division are here anymore. About 75% of the fighting force has already taken up its new positions along the Iraqi border. When I say along, I mean a few miles back.
Ted, come back anytime. It's really fascinating to see how easy we got you up at this point, so we'll let you go for the second, do your work, and come back whenever you feel like it, please. Ted Koppel, who is out there with the 3rd Division tonight. And this is a little bit of Baghdad earlier. No, this is Baghdad now. Richard Engel is in the hotel there, not the famous Rashid Hotel, but elsewhere in town. Richard, do you want to pick up this and tell us what's going on, as best you know?
Yes, there still seems to be some activity going on. I don't know if that is focused on that, what they call that target of opportunity or not. But now, somewhat further away from the city, I am still hearing explosions up until a few seconds ago. They're quite distant, so it's very hard to identify where they're coming from and what exactly they are. But there's still this operation. It doesn't seem like it was over and done with. It does seem to be still continuing in some capacity, although it may have shifted.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much. Just stay with us. Come back at any time. One of the things we know about the F-17 is it is the stealth fighter, and it is virtually invisible to radar. And this does remind us in a very minor way what it was like on the first night of the Gulf War. And we thought we were seeing one thing, and we're seeing another thing. And as we look up into the night sky 12 years ago, what we all collectively thought was an attack was in fact just a nervous, frantic reaction by the Iraqi ground forces firing anti-aircraft almost indiscriminately up into the sky. The F-117 is virtually invisible to radar, so there's no particular reason why Iraqi radar will have picked up anything. But there will have been, clearly, if the U.S. has managed to get itself onto Baghdad radio, onto the national radio, there will have been part of the shock and maybe even the awe that has been referred to. But again, we remind ourselves as much as anybody else that on the first night of the Gulf War we didn't know what the heck was going on, and it is probably true on this particular evening. Whether it's a target of opportunity or something we can identify, it takes a long period of time for bombing damage to be estimated and to be analyzed and to determine whether anything has happened. But certainly it has set the dogs of Baghdad off tonight. Richard, anything else?
No, it's gone quiet. I've been searching the radio for a while, and I haven't didn't see it on. I didn't come up with it on FM. They seem to be normal broadcast, Iraqi broadcast. There was religious programming, and then I went through the shortwave frequencies and came up with a variety of international programs that were carrying President Bush's speech, including a relatively strong signal from Radio Free Iraq. But that wasn't anything out of the ordinary. But I'm still scanning the airwaves, as it were, Peter.
We're very lucky because Richard Engel is an Arabic speaker. It gives us a very distinct advantage among reporters because not many people do speak Arabic. It's about 25 minutes after 6 in the morning. Just to review a little bit of the president, in case you have, just joined us. The president came on and said, almost at the top of his speech there, that he was speaking on behalf of the 35 countries in the coalition. A little more accurate appraisal of the actual battle components of all this. The U.S., of course, Britain, which has about 40,000 men, 2,000 Australians, 150 Bulgarians, 360 from the Czech Republic. These are mostly these Eastern European contributions concerned with chemical or biological attacks, and Slovakia has sent 75 people. But as the president then went on to absolutely clarify, because this will be seen throughout the world as a U.S. attack, when he said to the U.S. military that the fate of Iraq and Iraqis depends on you. This is a sustained commitment the United States is making. The United States has no ambition in Iraq except freedom. And it's interesting because this is one of the first times that Mr. Bush, or for that matter anyone from his administration, has warned that the conflict might be more difficult and might be more costly than many officials and analysts have suggested. We'll have lots of opportunity to come back to that. To our military analyst, Tony Kordersman. Tony, as I recall some of our briefings over the last several weeks and months, there are at the very minimum about 70 potential targets in Baghdad which the U.S. is interested in.
That's right, Peter. If we take a look at this wide area map of Baghdad, we're talking about the Special Republican Guards being in this area, his main intelligence service and bodyguard, the National Security Council. We're talking about 3 other intelligence services, It's almost amazing to consider how many targets, how many men, just to protect Saddam, there really are in this city. And the leaders of those units, as well as Saddam, are certainly targets of opportunity.
Thanks, Tony. And of course, as we've watched the intelligence and watched as best we can the movements of the Iraqis, we get all this secondhand through military intelligence and those briefings which the military give us. We've watched, apparently, Saddam Hussein and his inner circle draw his forces back into a variety of concentric circles around Baghdad. In fact, the reporting from John McCarthy earlier tonight was that the forces in the south, where the U.S. forces have still not crossed the border in large numbers, are largely regular Iraqi army, and U.S. forces are getting signals that they may be disinclined to fight. Let's go to Qatar. Qatar is the home for this war of Central Command, led by General Tommy Franks, and ABC's Chris Bury is there. Chris, what can you tell us?
Peter, we now have confirmation from a military official here at U.S. Central Command that, in fact, an operation aimed at regime targets was underway over Baghdad tonight. This is what they call the effects-based targeting, going after very specific goals, and in this case, it would be regime change, a target, perhaps a palace or a ministry. We haven't been given specific targets, just that, in fact, an operation aimed at regime targets was underway. The only hint that we got that this might be, something might be coming up is earlier, a senior military official suggested that we would see a big increase in the tempo over the southern no-fly zones, that anything the Iraqis had that could possibly threaten the U.S. and British troops gathered in Kuwait would be taken out. And in fact, yesterday we saw several major hits on everything from artillery batteries to surface-to-surface missiles across the southern no-fly zone. This obviously is a different kind of attack, but we do have confirmation now that it was underway, aimed at regime targets in Baghdad.
As we look at a map first of Baghdad, and then perhaps we could look at a map of the southern portion of the country, is Ted Koppel still available to us? Okay, I think one of the things that Ted would have told us, and almost anybody with U.S. forces who are up along the border between Kuwait and Iraq. These, by the way, as we look at this map, this may be misleading at the moment because this is the area of Baghdad which we are fairly able to see from our position there. And there are no huge explosions in downtown Iraq. We use the Al Rashid Hotel as a central marking point because it's been famous ever since the '91 campaign. But there's no indication, at least, that in this fairly tight area, that perhaps farther south on the edge of the city, based on what we've heard, there may have been a target of opportunity. Well, we will not know. It is all speculation at the moment. But as we go to the southern part of the country, if we could get up a picture or a map of the border of Iraq and Kuwait, along the Kuwait border there from Al-Fa, which is on the peninsula just below Basra, which is the first city ground troops will encounter of any significance they go across. All American forces are deployed down there. It's basically the only way into the country which land forces can go. There are just a huge number of forces down there, and they are all, get John McCarthy, our Pentagon correspondent on this, have all been anticipating and have been told to anticipate the possibility that in the days before a massive U.S. attack, there might be a preemptive attack by the Iraqis using chemical or biological weapons. There were some reports, John McCarthy, earlier this evening that people had to get in their suits for a while. But at least as of the moment, nothing of this nature has been realized.
It has not been realized, but there has been plenty of reporting in the last several days indicating that some of the frontline Iraqi units have now been given various types of chemical weapons. They know that because they have been given what are called binary canisters, which means it is in a safe mixture, and when you actually arm the warhead, you put them together, mix them together, and you get VX, which is a very potent and persistent nerve gas. Peter, I have a couple of things to tell you. Number one, they are now saying there were about 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles that were used in this attack. A very small number of F-117s, each armed with a couple of 2,000-pound bombs, were also used. They were going after very senior leadership, and I think we can read into that Saddam Hussein himself or his two sons may have been in the crosshairs tonight. You mentioned that the president this afternoon had a sort of a quiet afternoon. He did meet with what is called his War Council this afternoon, and they did make the decision that the intelligence was, quote, actionable to go after these very senior people. And it was just in the few hours after that they were able to mount this attack, which in military terms was a fairly remarkably quick turnaround from going not at war at all to this kind of a precision strike, or they will say it's a precision strike. We'll see.
John, let's do some basics for folks, and we'll try to do it on a regular basis, because we refer to the Tomahawk, that is a cruise missile. It's sea launch, which means that the cruise missiles, Jack, would have been on their way for some time from the Persian Gulf. They're not very fast. Explain to people what they do.
These are relatively low-flying missiles, which are guided in a number of different ways. They can both follow the terrain, and they are guided by GPS satellites, global positioning satellites. They have about 1,000-pound warhead. They are very precise. Some of these were fired from the Persian Gulf, we are told, Peter, and some, in fact, from the Red Sea, which means that they would have to fly over Saudi Arabia to make their journey.
And you say there were about 40 Tomahawks that were used tonight in a couple of flights of F-17s?
That's correct.
And using the F-117, to drop fairly heavy, what, a couple of 1,000-pound bombs?
Yeah, several 2,000-pound bombs, we are told. But of course, in all of this, Peter, we must remember that the early and first reports are probably going to be fragmentary and partially wrong, but I think we do have it right that there were some Tomahawk cruise missiles, and quite a lot of them. They clearly wanted to have an impact on this target they went after.
Okay, thanks very much, Jack. We'll come back to you as he continues to work the story there. ABC's Martha Raddatz is at the State Department at the moment. Everybody has, to be honest, taken a little bit off guard by this and are still trying to figure out, Martha, whether or not this is, a pre-planned. It doesn't sound like it. It does sound very much like an actionable, as John said, an actionable target of opportunity. Does this mean, do we think, that other people in the coalition or other very close allies will have been told in advance that something was happening?
Well, I suspect if they were involved in any way in the military action, Peter, what I'm reminded of tonight is the '98 strike on Osama bin Laden's training camps in Afghanistan. Right. That at the time was real-time intelligence. They knew he was there. They sent cruise missiles up. The cruise missiles were launched from quite a ways away, took too long for them to get there, and that's why they missed them. These cruise missiles are, of course, much closer to Baghdad than they were to Afghanistan, and they also use the F-117s, and that may be the reason they use those F-117s, because when you're dealing with real-time intelligence, you want your weapons there as fast as possible.
Interesting, Martha. I'm going to ask our control room if they'd put up a map again, because John says that some of these crews, the Tomahawks, would have come from the Red Sea, not just from the Persian Gulf. We might even get a map that's a little wider of the region of this. But Martha, what's interesting here, well, so much of it is interesting here, is that intelligence in Iraq, human intelligence, for the last several years by the United States has been acknowledged to be, by everybody, even in government, as appallingly bad. But it's got very much better, it seems, in the last couple of months, or so we're told. Correct?
Yes, I believe it has gotten much, much better, the human intelligence, as they call it. There are a lot more people talking. That may be because they thought war was imminent. There may be people who are trying to save themselves and in some way are talking. We also had a lot of people on the ground, which also may help. They may have been making contacts. Who knows who was in there and at what time. And of course, the United States had CIA personnel up in northern Iraq. There was probably all kinds of infiltration into Iraq that we don't know about, but the human intelligence had improved a great deal, and intelligence officials that I have talked to said they were quite happy with it in the last couple of weeks.
Okay, let's give people a sense of geography here. The Red Sea, of course, which goes up through Egypt and up to Jordan, the other side. There are very significant components of the U.S. Navy in the Red Sea, and if you look over there to the right, there's about 100 and some odd ships wandering around the Persian Gulf in pre-described boxes, back and forth, back and forth. There were 6, I think, carrier groups in the region now. Maybe there are 5, and I think 1 on the way, but there's an enormous capacity both in the Red Sea, and if you look up even above Jordan and Israel and Lebanon there are other capacity to okay. Okay, let's go. We're joined at the moment by Major General William Nash, who is one of our consultants. He was commander of the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Armored Division during Desert Storm. He's now a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Did this catch you off guard this evening?
Well, it did, Peter, but we've been used to jumping up in the middle of the night and getting to the map board.
Right. So what are your earlier impressions here?
Well, I think the assessment that we heard from Ted Koppel is, it seems right to me. The fact is that this is not a shock and awe attack that we've seen to date. The Tomahawk missiles, the F-117 sorties indicate that they had some intelligence and thought they might be able to pick off some senior leaders quickly. I have heard one report about the C-130 Commando solo flights that have been broadcasting in Arabic to the region, trying to reinforce this. So it looks so far to me that this was a hastily put together target attack to go after the targets.
General Nash, before long we may be calling you Bill. I hope you don't mind, but we'll call you.
Oh, I wish you would.
I'll call you Bill. In the 91 war, as I recall, it took about 90 minutes for a cruise missile to get from the Persian Gulf up to Baghdad. Am I right or wrong?
I think that seems about right. You understand, I was in the middle of the desert at the time, and we saw the airplanes going over, but the cruise missiles were coming on either side of us going in.
But it would very much argue, would it not, at the moment, that if they take anything resembling that, I know they've been vastly improved, that here was a target of opportunity in Baghdad, perhaps having to do with the leadership. We're not certain of that yet. That there would have been a fair amount of warning that something was available and something was vulnerable.
Well, understand that the Tomahawk missiles may well have gone in on the known targets, the air defense and command and control centers necessary, and then the F-117s who could be directed to attack those targets of opportunity. The Tomahawks would be used as suppression, the 117s for the kill.
Let me go back to Tony Cordesman, our resident military consultant. Tony, tell us briefly, how precise can the cruise missile be, and what are the disadvantages of it?
Well, it can be amazingly precise, Peter. It's about twice as precise and reliable as it was at the time of the Gulf War. After the Gulf War, they concluded that 50% hit near the target. In recent wars, something like 80% at least have been hitting near the target, often within 10 meters or less. Now, the disadvantages are that if you can see it, it flies low, and it's possible under some conditions that you can shoot it down. But again, they've been improved. In the Gulf War, they had to fly very predictable lines because they followed radar mapping. Now they use GPS guidance, satellite guidance, and they can be programmed to fly flight paths where they can't predict where they're coming from.
And am I right, Tony, 90 minutes from the Gulf, and therefore how far from the Red Sea to fly across Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's a slow-flying missile. I would think that basically you're talking at least a couple of hours. Remember that it has to go across Saudi Arabia. It also has to come from the ship. One other difference from the Gulf War is they can reprogram the targets on those cruise missiles in a matter of minutes, and it took a long time during the Gulf War.
Okay, Tony, thanks very much. I think we can go now to Ron Claiborne. We can't, it's just information. Ron Claiborne is the our ABC reporter who is embedded, as we say. There are several hundred reporters from around the world embedded, traveling with the U.S. military. And Ron is on the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Persian Gulf. And they are not blacked out. A lot of reporters with ground units are already blacked out, which means they're not in a position to broadcast because they're moving towards the front. But let me just tell you briefly what he says, that Admiral Kendall Card, who's the commanding officer on the Lincoln, went on the PA system around 6 a.m. local time this morning to announce that the cruise missiles are ready to be launched. That Operation Iraqi Freedom, as the administration is calling it, began around 6:15 local. That's 10:15 in the eastern United States. They played country and western songs, God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood, loudly. Captain Card is from Texas, and he had said he would play this when the war began. No fighter bombers have been launched from the Lincoln tonight, but the Texan Admiral Kendall Card did say that that was the real sign that things had began when they played the Lee Greenwood song, God Bless the USA. Is Terry Moran at the White House? Terry, how involved is the president been in the nitty-gritty of this in the last couple of weeks?
In the military planning, he takes what he styles himself as an executive approach. I've been told that his style is to ask a lot of questions, to play devil's advocate, but he doesn't pretend to be a general, and he's very careful in not making the calls, but he wants to be briefed a lot, and he has now gone to calling twice daily meetings of this War Council of the Vice President, who just left here, the Secretaries of Defense and State, Condoleezza Rice, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and others. This is a style that he has of peppering any aide, any cabinet department official, and his generals with questions, and he wants answers.
So, having spoken to the nation tonight, what has he done since? Do you know? Has he gone back to the residence, or has he gone off to command headquarters?
No, he's gone off to the residence. This is a president who is early to bed and early to rise, and it looks as if the lights are off up there. He is back in the residence. He left shortly after the speech. We did see Vice President Cheney here, which is significant since there has been a policy almost of keeping them apart quite a bit since September 11th. The National Security Advisor was here as well, but now all are going home for the night.
Okay, Terry, many thanks. Various people on whom we rely tremendously are beginning to gather with us this evening. Among them is former Lieutenant General Greg Newbold of the U.S. Marines, who's the former Director of Operations at the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the former Commanding General of the 1st Marine Division. Good evening, General Newbold.
Good evening, Peter.
What are your thoughts on what we're seeing? Because it's a little hard to figure out whether we're seeing the beginning of the Big Bang or we're seeing just an isolated attack tonight.
Well, there are several indicators that would reinforce the notion that it is not the Big Bang, and that is that we know what the objectives were of the overall air campaign, and what we're seeing now aren't consistent with that, but are in fact consistent with a notion that we're going after selected targets with the precise weapons that would be useful. In the case of the Tomahawks, launching them from seaborne platforms makes them relatively immune from being picked up by observers that might be able to watch an airbase.
Because you actually, the crews, the Tomahawk, any of the crews are slow enough, are they not, to be picked up by an observer just standing on the side of a road as they go by? Do you remember those pictures during the Gulf War of the guys going up and turning left?
That's absolutely true. From the Red Sea and from the Gulf launch baskets, as they call them for the Tomahawks, they would fly over the sea for a portion of that time. Another important aspect of the Tomahawks is they fly with a flat trajectory and have a relatively small warhead. So as Tony Cordesman said, they are good for suppression and good for light shelters. And the reason the F-117 is used is with the 2,000-pound warhead, it can have a penetrator attached to it that allows it to, as indicated, penetrate deep into bunkers and command and control nodes.
The F-17 is not very easy to fly, though, is it?
No, it's not, but then it does not have to be because it's designed to launch its munitions from a good distance away under stealthy conditions, and it can launch them with great precision.
So as the Navy ships were for the Tomahawk cruise missiles tonight, the F-17 is their platforms for which to launch these very, hopefully, from the U.S.'s point of view, very precise weapons.
That's right.
Okay. We're also joined tonight by General George Jalwan, who is a former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, former NATO Commander in Europe. General Jalwan, nice to have you. You also caught a bit off guard here, or not?
Well, not really.
Go on.
No, I think what we're going through now is a preparatory stage in the build-up to actual large-scale conflict. What you're seeing is what the key word that was mentioned so far tonight is actionable intelligence.
Right.
We have reconnaissance, which we do reconnaissance in force before any large-scale movement of the ground force. So you have a lot of reconnaissance going on inside Baghdad, in the southern zone as well as in the North Kurdish zone. So all of this is part of the preparation for the attack, and we might have had clear indications from some of our folks inside of Baghdad that they have acquired a target, and that's what I think you had the Tomahawk missiles fired, which, by the way, are precise and very accurate and can be called in on precise targets. And that's what I think you've seen here.
General, I have a couple questions for you. First of all, I should tell you that the British military spokesman in Kuwait tonight said that as far as he was concerned, neither the British nor the Americans had been asked to launch their ground forces yet, so you're absolutely correct on the first point. I think everybody agrees, maybe waiting for something else. But you mentioned intelligence. I think we all believe, rightly or wrongly, that there are intelligence assets that have been dropped into the country in a variety of places. But do you really believe that the U.S. would have serious intelligence assets on the ground in Baghdad at the moment? Wouldn't that be extremely difficult?
Let me answer in a simple word: yes. There's no doubt in my mind that they're there. And they've been trained to do this, and I think that they're going to provide the sort of information and the disruption. What you want to do here is get inside their head in Baghdad, get them talking much more in the open, and I think you're going to see a lot of that. These are troops that are not well disciplined. That's why you saw all the firing. And I think hopefully our Joint Stars and other intelligence assets are plotting those positions, which will be taken under fire when this larger scale attack takes place. So I think this is all part of the preparatory stage that you're seeing.
Okay, thank you very much. The Associated Press, by the way, is reporting from Baghdad tonight that at least on the state-run television broadcast, so television has come on in the morning in Baghdad. You remember this, if you just joined us, it was a report that the U.S. might somehow have managed to take over state radio and broadcast a sort of liberation message at the end of the regular broadcast done by the Iraqi state announcer, all of them controlled by Saddam Hussein. And now the Associated Press, that state-run television has come on and said, doesn't quite sound like something Americans would be saying at the moment, it's an inferno that awaits them. Let them try their faltering luck, and they shall meet what awaits them. Richard Engel is still on the line with us in Baghdad. Richard, anything to add? Richard Engel?
Hello?
Hey, Richard, it's Peter again. How much, if you like, look out your window, what part of Baghdad are you looking at? How far can you see? How much perspective can you get on the town itself? It's a very big city.
I'm quite high up. I'm on the 14th floor, which makes me hope that these weapons are as precise as everyone is saying. But I have a very clear view of the whole city. It's sort of a misty morning. It's this major barrage happened, or what was major, even if it was a minor barrage, the largest part of it happened just right before sunrise. And most of the activity, it's still been sporadic. There hasn't been anything for about 5 minutes, but there are distant explosions. I don't know if they're anti-aircraft or what they were. Maybe you could ask some of the military consultants if that's typical of a Tomahawk attack, that they would continue to have explosions even an hour after it started, or if that would signal that maybe there's something more going on there that we don't know about.
Richard,
But there's also an eerie... Yes, Peter?
I was just going to say, as you're talking, we're going to roll again the videotape of this cruise missile attack because we were able to pick up some of it as it was occurring.
That's pretty much what it sounded like. It was basically to the southeast of where I am right now. I could actually see the red tracer as the anti-aircraft fire was going up. And first I heard the anti-air raid sirens and jumped out of bed and put clothes on to come out to the balcony and see what was going on. And we had really no idea because I was under the impression that if this was going to start, it was going to start big. It was going to be a major, prolonged operation, and it wasn't that. So we were confused. At first I thought maybe it was some sort of military test and a drill, and I think a lot of Iraqis are also confused. You see there's some people, their cars driving around on the street. There's some kids sitting on the corner in front of me, looking at a car just rounding the corner in front of the hotel. So it's not a city that has been shocked and panicked and is now boarded up in their homes. Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. What you're looking at there, of course, is, I think we're now pretty accustomed to, that's anti-aircraft. That is not incoming, that is outgoing. It took us a little while in the 91 war to figure out precisely what is happening. But as we now believe, at least this is from senior military officials here, about 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles reported to John McCarthy were fired from Navy ships in both the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, and a small number of F-17, the stealth fighter jets, not easily seen by radar, though one was brought down in Bosnia during the campaign there. So if there's the fraction of access as there was on an F-17 in Bosnia, they believe, at which radar can lock on, the F-117 is still vulnerable. But a small number of them tonight were used to fly in and drop precision guided bombs on what we've been told was a target of opportunity. There are, senior officials also tell us, operational preparations taking place elsewhere, but this is not A day, attack day, as best we can tell. This is not H hour, as everybody has been anticipating. And when the president and his spokesman earlier went on and simply said this was the opening phase of an attack which the president said, along with the other members of the coalition nation, was intended to liberate the Iraqi people. John McCarthy at the Pentagon.
Peter, we now understand that they were going after at least 2 targets in different places around Baghdad, so they obviously had some information about not where just one high-ranking individual was, but several. Interestingly, on one of the ships that was firing the Tomahawk cruise missiles, there are members of the press. So I assume that we will eventually get some sort of report from a reporter on one of these ships when the missiles were actually fired. One of the points that you made earlier about the kind of intelligence in Baghdad, part of the strategy of this overall campaign is going to be to break down the ability of the regime to communicate, and by doing so you end up harvesting a real bounty of intelligence, because people who use one type of communications have to come out and use a much more open type that is easier for the U.S. not only to intercept but to triangulate and figure out where it's coming from.
But John, in some respects, what I think confirms for us that this was not the real opening was the plans that the U.S. has for an astonishing technological attack. Maybe you could describe it for us in brief, in order to paralyze Iraqi communications, both civil and military.
Oh, absolutely. I think when the U.S. decides to launch its overall air campaign, it will be obvious and it will be spectacular in some ways, both by the types of technology the U.S. uses, their attempts to be precise, but also extremely lethal on the targets they're going after. I suspect that this early attack, Peter, is going to change at least part of the game plan. First of all, this evening there was a plan to begin infiltrating special operations forces into various parts of Baghdad to prepare the ground for later ground forces that would move into specific areas in the north, the western desert, and in fact in some areas in the south. I don't know how that would be impacted, but I can guarantee you that the air patrols over the southern and northern no-fly zones of Iraq are going to change radically in the hours ahead, that the United States will go after many more targets of opportunity now that this war has begun.
And do you believe, John, again, that when the balloon really goes up in a huge way, involving the massive amount of planes that they prepare to use, we're going to have a sense, perhaps not just in Iraq, but beyond its borders. In some cases, somebody told me all the way to Europe, of the electronic ramifications of using some of the weapons that have never been used before.
Some of the weapons do have that potential, Peter. Those are fairly subtle weapons, actually, that you were talking about. These are information operations where the United States becomes offensive in attacking computer systems that could end up affecting banking systems all over Europe and all over the world. I think the United States has backed off of some of those plans, which is not to say that during the course of this conflict, the U.S. will not be involved. I think the U.S. will be involved in getting into the lines of communication within Iraq, telephone systems, computer systems. I can almost assure you that if they are still functioning, the U.S. will be at least monitoring, if not controlling, and providing some false information into those systems.
Okay. John, thanks very much. We're trying to bracket the country as best we can. We've been on the southern border between Kuwait and Iraq with ABC's Ted Koppel. Now we can go to the western border, which was Iraq, where Iraq meets Jordan. And ABC's David Wright has been monitoring that border for the last couple of days for us. David, what, if anything, is happening or do you see from there?
Well, Peter, just moments ago, we saw the first signs of air activity in this part of the world. Two small fighter planes flying overhead, something along the size of an F-111, although it's difficult to see from our vantage point here. There's a Jordanian air base not far from where I'm standing that U.S. forces have been using, and when planes take off and land there, we are able to see it. And just to orient you, I am about 350 miles due west of Baghdad. Baghdad is pretty much exactly where the sun is rising behind me. And U.S. forces and other nationals are using this as a staging area to go after targets in the western part of Iraq. These are thought to be some of the early targets as well, because it's from there that Iraq launched Scud missiles at Israel in 1991.
David, thank you very much, and thank you everybody else as well. We're going to conclude this particular special report, which was designed as much as anything to catch up with what is happening, because people were, I think, generally fairly stunned to see that in a plan that was still is so programmed with so many components to it, that the U.S. was flexible enough, as we had been told it might be, to go after a selected target this evening somewhere in the southern suburbs of Baghdad. We do not know yet what it was. We know what was fired off. 40 Tomahawk missiles and a couple of F-117s flew in. We're told that it may have been the Iraqi leadership itself, but there is no damage assessment whatsoever, and will not likely be one until tomorrow, if history is any lesson. And then the president came on, of course, and told us that these were selected targets. This was the opening assignment, if you will, of a war which everybody knew was going to occur when Saddam Hussein and his two sons did not leave the country tonight. Nobody expected they would, as the president had demanded they do in order to avoid an American attack. We shall be back whenever anything else happens. You can monitor all the time at abcnews.com in many parts of the country. Your local news will be coming up on behalf of my colleagues at ABC News. Nightline will be later. Ted Koppel will be up there on the Kuwaiti-Iraqi frontier with the Army. I'm Peter Jennings at ABC News headquarters.
This has been an ABC News special report, War with Iraq. For continuing coverage of this story, stay with ABC News and abcnews.com.
This is ABC.